Good afternoon. Welcome to the 2022 Enabling Change for Retailers webinar series. This series is brought to you by the Ontario Government's Ministry for Seniors and Accessibility. My name is Marcy Wendt. I am the Manager of Education for the Retail Council of Canada. For this series, we'll be focusing on mental health. For today's session, the Mental Health Commission of Canada will be discussing the basics of psychological health and safety in the workplace. Protecting and promoting the mental health of employees at all levels requires more than overcoming stigma around talking about mental health. It's about identifying and working together to manage the workplace factors that can affect psychological health and safety to ensure positive results. For today's session, this session outlines the key elements that contribute to psychological health and safety work environment. However, before we can get started, here are a few housekeeping items. So for today's agenda, we'll have a housekeeping items. I will introduce our guest speaker from the Mental Health Commission, and then we'll have our presentations on the basics of psychological health and safety in the workplace. And at the end, we'll wrap up with a few questions. This webinar is being broadcast in French. If you wish to listen to the presentation in French through the French language translation audio telephone, please dial the toll-free number on the screen, 1-888-499-6608, or one of the numbers listed on the screen. You will be asked to enter the French audio PIN of 036-997-810. Today's webinar is being recorded. All the attendees will receive a web link to access the recording. The recording will also be available on RCC's YouTube channel and also our website with subtitles in French and English. If you have any questions during the webinar today, please put your questions into the chat feature in the bottom right-hand corner. If you have any questions after the webinar, you're welcome to contact myself at 1-888-373-8245, extension 320, or at education@retailcouncil.org. We have one more webinar in this series, and it will be next week on September 21st. The Mental Health Commission will be back again for the second part with guiding the guide to build mental health within retail operations. That webinar will actually be at 3 p.m. It was a different time from our normal 1 p.m. So please note the time will be 3 p.m. for this webinar. All right, I would like to introduce our guest speaker today. Liz Horvath is the Manager of Workplace Mental Health with the Mental Health Commission of Canada. Liz has been helping organizations achieve better results by keeping workers healthy, safe, and productive for over 25 years. Through her previous work, she has a deep understanding of the industry. She has experience in workplace health and safety, human rights, legislation and standards, and experience with the legal system. Liz managed the development of the national standard and the Canadian of Canada on the psychological health and safety in the workplace, and currently leads the workplace mental health program at the Mental Health Commission of Canada, where she helps organizations implement mental health workplace strategies that align with the standard. Throughout her career, Liz has trained and coached people at all levels of the organizations and has led numerous committees to achieve their mandates. She has dealt successfully with workplace accommodations. and situations in claim involving physical health and safety hazards, psychological stressors, and workplace conflict. As an accomplished consultant and international speaker, she is known for her empathy, interpersonal skills, and her expertise in physical and psychological health and safety. She is sought after for her experience and her advice. Liz is a Canadian registered safety professional and a member of the Canadian Society of Safety Engineering, the International Association on Workplace Bullying and Harassment, the Crisis and Trauma Resource Institute, and the Human Resource Professional Association. She's a dedicated wife and grandmother and supports charitable organizations that work to improve the lives of the people with desperate need. So I want to join me in thanking Liz for today. I will now pass the presentation over to Liz.
Great, thank you so much, Marcy, and thank you to Retail Council of Canada for having us come and speak. And I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today and taking time out of your busy schedules. I know that's not easy. So we're going to jump right in here. You know, we know that we've been through a really pivotal time in these last couple of years, and I think you know, there's many industries that have really felt the crunch of what we've been through. But I think that you know, retail and hospitality have been areas where we know that things have been really tough. And you know, we know that it's important to really look at, you know, what does psychological health and safety in the workplace look like, and how can we help organizations within this industry to ensure that they have a psychologically healthy and safe workplace, because having that in place helps to make sure, you know, it helps with so many things. It helps with the morale in the workplace. It helps with employee retention. It helps with attracting talent and keeping that talent. And it just makes work just that much better. But there's so much more that it goes into. I'm not going to go into all of that, but because we do have quite a bit here to cover today. But we just know that you know, when you have a psychologically healthy and safe workplace, you have a productive workplace, and you have a workplace where people want to work and want to be there. So let's dive in here. Before we begin, though, in the spirit of reconciliation, I just want to begin with a bit of a land acknowledgement. You know, we do wish to acknowledge that we are all viewing and participating in this session on the traditional territories of Indigenous peoples of what we now call Canada, part of what some of the First Nations people know as Turtle Island. The MHCC head office is on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe peoples, which includes contemporary Ottawa, and we thank Indigenous peoples for sharing this land with us. I also invite you all to connect meaningfully to the land that you're currently standing on. Globally, we have an important responsibility to collectively acknowledge the grounds on which we are privileged to gather, even if gathering virtually, in the pursuit of being more resilient communities. Now, personally, I've been on my own journey of learning, which I know will be lifelong. And in addition to working at MHCC, I'm seeking to know more about how I can contribute to reconciliation and healing. I've been trying to learn more about Indigenous people, where I live and work in what is now called Richmond Hill. I've taken a 12-week course on Indigenous Canada from the University of Alberta, and I'm seeking to learn more about my own great-grandfather and his people, who I recently learned was part of the Blackfoot Nation in the area that we now call Winnipeg. So it's important that we all, you know, acknowledge and do our part towards reconciliation and healing. So as we move in, I'm going to talk just a little brief intro to the Mental Health Commission of Canada for those of you who may not know who we are. We do consider ourselves as a catalyst for changing the mental health landscape in Canada. And Tiana, my colleague, who you'll be hearing from next week, we're both proud to be working at the MHCC. We're not going to go into detailed intros because these sessions are rather short, but well, we do want to just talk a moment about our philosophy. Our strategic plan is on our website. You're welcome to read it, to download it, to share it. It's available in both French and English. We are funded mostly by Health Canada, but we also receive some funding from other organizations, and we do provide, in workplace mental health, we provide some of our services for fees. But our strategic plan really focuses on 5 pillars here: uplifting our partners, amplifying lived and living experience of those who live with mental illness and mental health challenges. We seek to build a bigger table so that we can involve more people and embrace the best evidence, looking at the research that has been done and challenging the status quo to really make change throughout Canada in many different areas. Of course, the area where I work in is workplace mental health, so that's definitely my focus. So why are we here today? We're here to really help you have a better understanding of what psychological health and safety entails and how it applies to the workplace. And this is a really critical step in the journey of any organization. And what you're going to hear a little bit about today is the difference between mental health and what psychological health and safety in the workplace actually is. Because, you know, there's been a lot of talk about mental health over the last decade. And we've seen a lot of improvements, but there is a difference. And you know, in many organizations, and maybe even in your organization, you may or may not have had some training and discussions on mental health and reducing stigma. And this really was something that a lot of organizations didn't even do going back a decade ago. But as more organizations are realizing the importance of mental health for their workers and what it means for their business, it really means moving forward, not only in addressing and eliminating stigma, but putting those things in place that actually support a psychologically healthy and safe workplace. And that means supports, policies, processes that help to protect workers from psychological harm, as well as promote psychological health. So we're here to kind of help you with what that understanding is. So definitely feel free to ask questions, put your comments in the chat. We'll do our best to help you out here. I want to start out with a bit of a statement here. Psychological health and safety is like oxygen. And when I say that, what I really mean is that it's like psychological health and safety to a workplace is like oxygen is to our bodies. We don't notice it when we walk into a room, but we sure as heck notice it when it's not there. I mean, you can tell when you walk into a room for any amount of time if there's tension, if there's something that's just not quite right, or if people don't trust each other, or there's problems. So it's really important to have psychological health and safety in place. So with that being said, what exactly is psychological health and safety? Let me start by asking you a question. I'd like you to type into the chat what you think about when you hear the term mental health. What do you think about when you hear the term mental health? And I can see the chat here, so I'll just watch to see what responses come up. And for those that are in French, you may have to translate those for me. So I'm seeing depression, wellness, feeling light, being in a good place, mental well-being, state of your mental well-being, level of well-being, belonging, positive or negative well-being, fear, balance, fatigue, combination of good physical and mental well-being. Yeah, how we're managing ourselves, balance, purpose, self-care. Yeah, excellent. Thank you very much for your participation there. You know, it's interesting to see that when we ask people what they think about when you think about mental health, we see a combination of statements that have to deal kind of more along the lines of mental illness, and we see other statements that have to deal with mental wellness. And what I'm happy to see is that over time, as I've been asking this question, it used to be that 70% of the answers would be focused on mental illness, but we're actually starting to see more responses on the side of mental wellness, which is really good. Now, in case you've not seen this before, this is the actual definition of mental health from the World Health Organization. And you'll notice that it is a state of well-being in which the individual realizes his or her abilities. So it's about being able, not disabled. It's about abilities. They can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. And what the World Health Organization has said is that in this positive sense, mental health is the foundation of well-being and effective functioning for an individual and a community. Now, of course, a workplace also is a community. So it's important that we have mental health within our workplaces. And that's not to say that employers are responsible for the mental health of their employees, but employers have certain responsibilities for the health and safety of employees, and managing those things within the workplace that may affect mental health, workplace factors that affect mental health is part of it. I want you to notice also that this definition does not state that mental health is an absence of mental illness, okay? Mental health, a person can have mental health and live with mental illness as well. So notice that, mental health conditions, there's a wide range of mental health conditions, and these are disorders that can affect mood, thinking, and behavior. So those things such as depression, anxiety disorders, schizophrenia, eating disorders, and addictive behaviors. We are all somewhere along the continuum between mental illness and mental wellness. And within that, we fluctuate daily, we fluctuate throughout different times of our lives, and depending on environmental factors and social determinants of health and all the various different things that affect our mental health. So remember that when we're looking at mental health, what we're looking at is that state of well-being, and it's about abilities, coping, working productively, and contributing to society. So when we're able to do that, we can say that there's a good level of mental health. Now, when we look at psychological health and safety in the workplace, I'm going to be referring a lot to the National Standard for Psychological Health and Safety in the Workplace. And I'd like to just see how many people are familiar with the standard. If you can just type in to the chat yes or no, whether you're familiar with the standard, that would be great. Give me a bit of an idea. But the standard actually talks about what a psychologically healthy and safe workplace is. And it states that it is a workplace that promotes workers' psychological well-being and actively works to prevent harm to workers' psychological health, including in negligent, reckless, or intentional ways. Now, the standard is a voluntary document, so it's not mandatory, but we do know that there's some governments now that are looking at whether to make parts of it mandatory in legislation. According to the standard, this really is about promoting mental wellness. So those things that you do to reduce stigma in the workplace, to make sure that people have that feeling of belonging and well-being, those are all good things, and promoting things that actually support mental wellness, such as good nutrition and good relationships in the workplace and communication. Those things all support and promote mental health, but it's also working to prevent mental harm in negligent, reckless, and intentional ways. So negligent could be things like not putting in supports in place for people to deal with difficult situations or crises. Recklessness can be not correcting behavior that may be harmful. Intentional, well, that's talking about harassment, bullying, and violence. So remember that when we're talking about psychological health and safety in the workplace, we're not just talking about supporting people who are living with mental illness. We're talking about supporting preventing mental harm and promoting mental well-being for all employees. And in doing that, we can actually help potentially to reduce the potential that someone might experience mental illness or might experience negative impacts from mental illness. So we really need to look deeper into the fabric of the organization in order to do this. So there's a few things that I'm going to talk about here. Some of the reactive stuff and some of the proactive. Now, when I talk about reactive, I'm basically talking about, something has happened and then we do something about it. And when we talk about legislation, that's usually what has happened. Legislation comes into place because something has happened that lawmakers feel that we need to now put legislation in place to make people follow these rules. So, at a minimum, employers have to understand what their legal duties are and take reasonable precautions related to workplace hazards and situations that can affect psychological health and safety of employees. So the legislation may not actually state it that way, but there are laws and regulations that relate to aspects that can affect employee psychological health and safety. So for example, the Human Rights Code and Occupational Health and Safety Act and regulations. So what they cover, for example, under the Human Rights Code, employers are required to accommodate employees who have a disability. And this includes employees who suffer from a mental illness. It also requires freedom from discrimination on prohibited grounds. There's also occupational health and safety legislation across Canada that requires employers to take reasonable precautions to protect the health and safety of a worker. And many jurisdictions now include requirements for protection from workplace harassment and violence. Now, always remember that these are minimum requirements. You'll notice here too, it says entitlement for workers' compensation benefits. That's also under whether it's workers' compensation in some provinces or WSIB here in Ontario. There's many jurisdictions now are providing compensation for psychological stress or chronic stress. So we have to really look at that. Employers have to understand what the rights of employees are and what the requirements are for them to follow. And you'll also notice that it states on the slide the right to disconnect from work, and that's in Ontario. That's under the new legislation in Ontario. It doesn't apply to all workplaces, but it does apply to most. So that is, after hours, not connecting with people to require them to act, through emails and whatever after hours. And it has to do with work-life balance. So there's a number of different requirements through legislation that it's important to make sure that whether you are a member representing management, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're a business owner, if you're part of HR, it's important for anyone in managerial positions to understand these legal requirements, but it's also important for people within the organization, all workers, to understand what their rights are with respect to these requirements and how they may contribute to positive mental health by following the rules and making sure that things are in place. So not going to go into any more detail on that, but what we do want to talk about here is that it is psychological health and safety really is about more than meeting minimum requirements. So as I said, legal requirements tend to be reactive. So when we think about psychological health and safety in the workplace, try and think about it as a way of managing the way that the workplace impacts our psychological well-being. And anybody who has worked for any period of time knows that we spend a significant amount of our time at work. So, and we have relationships at work. We have relationships with our coworkers, with our managers, with our employees, with our customers, with our vendors. So it's how work is managed. It's how the daily interactions are being managed and embedded. It has to do with the management practices that we put in place, not just policies and procedures, but also the practices and how things are carried out. The working conditions comes into it. You know, do we have good working conditions that contribute to psychological health and safety? I remember in one workplace I was working at where, you know, employees were dealing with a lot of headaches, and you know, one of the simple things that we did to change to deal with that was changing the lights, because lights were flickering, and that can be very, very distracting and irritating. So working conditions is another one. And then just really looking at it as a systematic way of thinking, like, how do we manage? Do we care about our people? Do we put them first? Do we understand that when we care about and take care of the people that are doing the work for us, that they're going to do good work? So it's really a matter of making sure that we're setting the right foundation for a psychologically healthy and safe workplace. Now, a healthy organization is also an inclusive organization. And with more and more of the work that we're doing here at the Mental Health Commission, we deal with a lot of organizations that are putting in place mental health strategies. And very often now they're starting to put in place diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies. And what we are hearing from our stakeholders too is that they really see such an interplay between these, and as we're looking at the national standard, we know that diversity is included in the national standard, but it's probably going to be strengthened as it goes forward. But we know that, you know, a healthy organization is inclusive. So really looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion, not in a way of tokenism. It's not, you know, saying that we've met the numbers for how many people we have to have from diverse backgrounds, but it's really looking at making sure that our workplace is reflective of the diversity of people who live in what we now call Canada, to provide inclusive opportunities so that people from these different backgrounds and dealing with different things in their lives can actually reach those equal opportunities. And it's about understanding the diverse needs of employees and embracing and celebrating their different abilities and cultures and everything that goes into that. It is a lot of work, I will say that. It does take having conversations with employees, perhaps doing surveys with employees, getting feedback, but you have to create those safe spaces where employees are going to feel comfortable in speaking up, getting outside the comfort zone, being courageous in being able to talk about what their needs are. And this is, it really is very important for having a psychologically healthy and safe workplace, to make sure that people do feel that they are included. And you'll notice, you know, when we look at the national standard of Canada, you know, when we were developing that standard, one of the things that that the committee looked at was the basic human needs at work. And when we look at basic human needs at work, it looks very similar to Maslow's hierarchy, if you're familiar with that, which starts out, you know, at the bottom with psychological needs. And then as you go up the pyramid, you've got the safety needs, love and belonging, esteem, and self-actualization. Well, when we look at the basic human needs at work, we see things like security, communication, physical and psychological safety. And as we go up, belonging, social justice, self-worth, esteem, autonomy, accomplishment, and self-efficacy. So these are things that we know when we talk about psychological health and safety, we're looking at meeting basic human needs at work. And the better we can do at meeting those basic human needs, the more psychologically healthy and safe our organization will be. The more people will want to work there, the more they will feel that sense of belonging, the more they will feel that esteem and autonomy and be able to become all that they can be in the workplace. And, you know, so when we approach each situation with that lens, we're really acknowledging and improving our employees' experience. So we really have to look at this at all levels. It's a matter of seeing things through a lens of empathy. And, you know, that means just basically seeing it through the other person's eyes. And while this may sound like a lot to you, and you might be thinking, well, how are we supposed to do all of that? We've got a business to run, and this is all very nice, but it is essential, and it really comes down to having those conversations and understanding how do we meet those needs. And the standard does provide some background and context to the basic human needs at work, and what will happen if we have that in place, what happens if we don't have it in place. So I do encourage you to download the standard if you haven't already. It is free for download, and we've included the link in the PDF that you'll get. So I do encourage you to read more about it. But right now we're going to go into talking a bit about, how do you actually do this? And this really requires a risk mitigation process. So, if you're familiar with occupational health and safety, you'll notice a few of the same things here. So identifying hazards, eliminating those hazards that you can eliminate, assessing the risk of hazards that you can't eliminate, and then putting the controls in place to reduce the risk that those hazards might pose to an individual. And in terms of the standard, they've also added prioritization to say, make sure that you're prioritizing the control of those hazards. So we do look at the hierarchy of risk control as a common process, and this includes things like using engineering controls, administrative controls, and personal protective equipment, and all of those in conjunction, as well as avoiding the situations and making sure that you have crisis control in place as well. So how do you know what to actually control for? Like, how do you know what hazards you're looking at identifying? Well, this gets into looking at the workplace factors that affect psychological health and safety. And the standard does outline 13 workplace factors, as well as an additional 14th, and there's other ones as well. But just to give you a bit of context, the workplace factors, they're also commonly called psychosocial factors. And these are factors, they're risk factors that include the way that work is carried out and the context in which work occurs. And it's really imperative that your organization assess these psychological risk factors and take appropriate steps to mitigate the risk of harm, because they do have the ability to potentially exacerbate harm or to cause mental health problems if they're not managed well. But if they are managed well, they can actually contribute to good mental health. And so, when we're talking about them as risk factors, think about them as risk or opportunity factors, because they can be both ways. They can be positive or negative. The factors are outlined, as I said, in the national standard. So you may be familiar with these 13 factors, or you may not have seen them before. There's still we still have a lot of work to do to make sure that the standard is out there. We know that there's a lot of people using it. It's been downloaded over 68,000 times. So we are seeing more and more organizations using it, more people putting in place controls for the 13 workplace factors. You'll notice things here like organizational culture, growth and development, civility and respect, workload management. These are all factors that we know contribute to a positive working environment. They support employee mental health and success. And if they're not managed well, they can lead to a significant risk of harm. And they are all interrelated. So when you make a change in one, if you make an improvement in one area, it's likely to make improvements in other areas as well. It's kind of like, you can't really separate them out. They all affect each other. So we'll have a look at a few of them here. I'm not going to go into detail about all of them, but they are defined in the standard. So, and if you have any questions about them, please feel free to contact us, because we can certainly help to guide you through. So for the first one that I want to talk about is organizational culture. And this is really important, because it's how we work to address those basic human needs at work. And it's defined in the standard as a mix of norms, values, beliefs, meanings, and expectations that group members hold in common and use as behavioral and problem-solving cues. It can enhance workplace psychological health and safety and the workforce when it values psychological and social support. And also when it values recognition and reward. And it also includes other characteristics such as trust, honesty, respect, civility, and fairness. Now, organizational culture, while it's one of the workplace factors that can affect psychological health and safety can also affect organizational culture. So it works both ways here. As we improve those other areas, the culture will improve. And as we improve the culture, those other areas will improve. Excuse me, I just need to take a sip of water. There we go. Civility and respect is another one, and it's present in a work environment where workers are respectful and considerate in their interactions with one another, as well as with customers and clients and the public. And an organization with good civility and respect would be able to state that people treat each other with respect and consideration in the workplace, that the organization effectively handles conflicts between stakeholders, for example, workers, customers, clients, the public, suppliers. Workers from all backgrounds are treated fairly in our workplace, and the organization has effective ways of addressing inappropriate behavior by customers or clients. So, you know that this is very important to have in our workplaces, and civility and respect are based on showing esteem, care, and consideration for others and acknowledging their dignity. And we chose this image on this slide for a very specific reason. It shows two people in a commercial kitchen. They're both looking at the camera and smiling, and one person has their arm on a coffee urn, and the other has their hand on the counter. And one of the people in this image lives with mental illness, but they're both working together and they're both smiling and they both look like they're just like having a fun time working together. And that's what, that's what we're talking about with civility and respect, is respecting the dignity of everyone. And, whether someone has a visible disability or an invisible disability, it doesn't matter. It's important to treat everyone with civility and respect. Now, psychological protection is another, and it's closely correlated with civility and respect. It meets similar human needs, as well as the need for belonging. And when psychological protection is present in a workplace, when it's compromised in a workplace, it can result in significant stress and higher risk of psychological and physical harm. And physical harm can occur from violence against a worker or from psychological effects of chronic stress. So it can have a tremendous impact also on the energy level of an individual. I mean, if someone is dealing with harassment at work, for example, that can really weigh down on their level of energy. It can weigh down on their ability, just their morale and their ability to go to work. And the Human Rights Code and the Occupational Health and Safety Act address this factor within the minimum requirements to protect workers from discrimination, from workplace harassment, which includes sexual harassment, and workplace violence. So the employer needs to have a policy, training, and procedures for reporting and investigating workplace harassment and violence. And legal compliance is generally not sufficient to ensure that this workplace factor is well in place. So as I mentioned, laws are minimum requirements. So according to the national standard, an organization should pay close attention to how workers feel about their ability to speak up, to ask questions, to report mistakes and problems, or to propose new ideas without fear of consequences. The organization should be actively promoting emotional well-being and taking all reasonable steps to minimize threats to workers' mental health. They should also actively seek to prevent harm from workplace harassment, bullying, discrimination, violence, or stigma. And many organizations only address these issues in their code of conduct, and they begin the process with reporting of incidents. but starting with prevention is more effective. And the means for prevention should be built into the organization's processes and training so that it becomes part of how business is carried out. And psychological protection is not limited to workplace harassment, violence, or stigma. While it's not reasonable to expect there to be no stress in a workplace, psychological protection does include minimizing unnecessary stress and being able to say that supervisors actually care about the emotional well-being of workers. And this can be challenging. Supervisors may benefit from training or coaching on developing leadership and interpersonal communication skills. So certainly addressing other workplace factors, again, will also help with this one. Now, psychological and social support has to do with the assistance available to help an employee with their psychological needs, whether those needs are work-related or not work-related, and the level of support that they receive from others in the workplace, including their supervisor and coworkers. So the national standards suggest that offering services and benefits that support mental health is one of the indicators of an organization with good psychological and social support. And one of the main issues that managers often feel confused with about is how to deal with employees who may be dealing with personal or family issues or who appear to be distressed at work. Sometimes people just don't know what to say or what to do. So organizations should have processes in place to help managers and others in the workplace to support workers who are under these circumstances. And training in how to address these types of situations may be needed. Just remember that one of the basic human needs is autonomy. So allowing a bit of discretion over how these situations are handled may also be an important aspect. Return to work processes should also address support for workers who return to work following an absence that is related to a mental health issue. And psychological safety and belonging are basic human needs, and addressing stigma in the workplace around mental health should be part of that return to work program. And that's to ensure that the worker is supported in their reintegration into the workplace. And that also helps to prevent a reoccurrence that might end up with that person being out of the workplace again. And since mental health is the foundation of well-being and it affects the organization, information and education should be provided to everyone in the workplace to help them understand the importance of mental health. Now, protection of physical safety is also important. It's present when a worker's psychological as well as physical safety is protected from hazards and risks related to a worker's physical environment. And so it's really showing, in the image we have two balls. One says physical and the other one says mental, and they're balanced on a fulcrum. So it really is about the fact that psychological mental health is just as important as physical health. And so some of the things that you would want to do are making sure that that you're providing the personal protective equipment that people need, that hazards are dealt with, that ergonomic solutions are in place to help minimize the risk of repetitive strain injuries and lifting injuries and different things like that. So taking action on the physical environment of the workplace that may impact a worker's physical health and safety will also help to improve the psychological health and safety as well. Just a couple more slides here on psychological and social support. Your organization may or may not have employee assistance programs, and they can be really helpful if you have them on helping out with things like coping skills and substance abuse and going back to work, managing family dynamics. So we really do encourage you, if you have employee assistance programs, to communicate them often. They are often utilized much less than they could be, and they are very, very helpful. So we do encourage you to communicate about them and really, let people know how, like, all the great things that it involves. But even if you don't have an employee assistance program, and we know that that there's many organizations that don't, there are community supports that may be available. And one of the most important ones to share with your employees, whether you have an EAP or not, are the crisis numbers and the counseling numbers that are available for people. So I do encourage you to, when you receive a copy of the presentation, take a copy of this slide and post it up in your workplace. Provide it to employees. One of the things that we also recommend is taking these numbers and putting them into your smartphone, so that if you need to contact these numbers, or you need to let an employee know or a coworker know that help is available, you can call the number and help to connect them with that help. So these are the numbers are there. There's also links to the websites and numbers to text. So Wellness Together Canada, for example, that is a service that is funded by Health Canada. It's available 24/7, and you can get all sorts of great information and help on there. So just finally, how do you pull it all together? Organizations tend to focus on anti-stigma training, which is great, and we do consider that to be the foundation. But there's many different areas where an organization will be looking at the various things that we have to do to put psychological health and safety in place. One of them will be looking at what programs you need to have in place, what policies you need to have, what benefits you have for your employees if you provide benefits, and if you don't provide employer covered benefits, then what's there in the community for employees. What training do we need to have in place? And of course, when it comes to training, we always recommend doing mental health first aid and the working mind, because those are anti-stigma trainings that can be very, very helpful to set that strong foundation. And doing assessments to figure out, where you're at with respect to the management of those workplace factors. Now, bringing it all together, doing those things in silo, they can have some results, but what we do recommend is following the national standard, because it does outline a framework of a management system that can help pull it all together. So what do you need to have in place for commitment, leadership, and participation? What planning needs to go into place? What needs to be implemented? What measurements and corrective action do you need to have in place? And then what inputs and outputs come from the management review? And it's a continual improvement cycle. So, because this is a journey, it's not expected that everything's going to be put in place at once. This is going to be a journey. It's part of a change in workplace culture, and it will take time. So, being able to get started and start moving down that road is very important. Making sure that you've got accountabilities and authorities in place, outlined in psychological health and safety policy, outlined in written roles and responsibilities, integrated with performance objectives. These things will all help to make sure that the accountability is in place, that people understand what they're responsible for, and that there's some consistency in how you're applying this new way of working. And for some of you, it may not be a new way of working. Some organizations have had these things in place for a long time. So kudos if you do already have things in place. And, with most organizations, when we go in and help organizations, we see that you usually have something in place. I haven't seen any organizations yet that are starting from zero. There's usually some things in place. So we've given you a few discussion questions to take back to your organization, that if you want to start those discussions, what do we have in place? What do we have for psychological health and safety elements? What do we have to build from? How can we advocate for a more robust psychological health and safety management system? And how can we as individuals contribute to the overall psychological health and safety of the workplace? And we've included here some resources for you. These are clickable. So we have some free resources available within MHCC and partner organizations. For example, MHCC and Mindful Employer Canada created a series of customizable posters that you can download and use in your workplace. And these are, there's also videos created in partnership with Ottawa Public Health on each of these factors, as well as a facilitator's guide. So you can actually do some training on the 13 workplace factors and use these posters that you can have people put on their virtual desktops, or you can put them up in the workplace, and they're customizable so that you can write in there what it actually means, you know, for your employees within that organization. And we also have an e-course on being a mindful employee. That course is being updated. So it'll be, it's got some broken links in it right now, and we have to update it for accessibility requirements. So we expect it to be available in January. There's a bunch of other resources that are available. For example, the standard. There's building mental health into retail and hospitality organizations, which is a guide that we put together after we ran the roundtable back in October. We heard from organizations that they were looking for more guidance on how to actually do this. So we put together this guide. We have a mini guide on suicide prevention in the workplace, and we do webinars on that as well. For managers, there's the leading in a hybrid work environment. Whether you're a hybrid work environment or not, this is a great guide for managers. There's a mini guide for helping employees through winter. There's language matters guide. There's all kinds of tip sheets and templates and things that are available. Each one of these images, when you receive the PDF, these are all clickable, so you don't have to go to the website looking for them. You can just click on this link and it'll take you right to that resource. And if there's anything else that you're looking for, I'm happy to guide you to it or send the link. So we also do provide retail counsel with links to these resources so that they can upload them onto their own site. And we do thank retail counsel for doing that and making our resources available, and for allowing us to come and talk to you, the members. And for those of you that'll be here at next week's, you'll be hearing from my colleague, Tiana Field-Ridley, who's going to go into more detail about the guide for building mental health into operations. So thank you so much.